All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting episode of D&D Deep Dive, the show where we dive deep into classes, subclasses, and other features of 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons to help you get the most out of your choices. So, today, we are going to be continuing through the Tal'Dorei Reborn subclasses by looking at the Runechild Sorcerer. Now, quick reminder, if you're enjoying these videos, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon and turn notifications on. All those things are super important. That being said, the Runechild Sorcerer was one of the subclasses that was in the original Tal'Dorei campaign setting. And I actually did cover the Runechild Sorcerer way back then. I think it was like a year-ish ago that I covered it. And I found some issues with it, specifically with the idea of the essence runes and how they transferred into the things like that. Like it turned into kind of a situation of an limited resource. And there's a few of the abilities that just didn't quite work. So when I saw that it was being reprinted in this, one of the first things I did was I went through and I went, okay, did it change much, or is it basically this is the same thing? And it did change a remarkable amount. It has the same, or most of the same features. There's only one additional feature, but they changed some wording. They change how some of the abilities work, and I think this one is a little bit more balanced, a little bit less prone to being able to be exploited, especially multi-classing and the things like that. So overall, I think I like it, and it's different enough that I don't feel weird doing a D&D deep dive on a class that I've already done. There's enough changes that I think this will still be a useful video. Excuse me. Sorry. Wow. This is something went down the wrong tube, apparently. So, let's dive into this. So, quick refresher on 5th edition class design. In 5th edition D&D, every class is designed to play very differently right from the beginning. In order to do that, each class has these things that we call defining features. Defining features are either things that are unique to the class, or maybe they're not unique, but the class is able to use them differently or gets them earlier than other classes. And in order for it to be a defining feature, it needs to show up within the first 2 levels. So, what are the sorcerer's defining features? Well, I'm glad you asked. First things first, sorcerers, like warlocks, actually choose their subclass at first level. So, your subclass is probably going to either give you a defining feature of some sort, or it's going to modify a defining feature, but it's going to be a part of these defining features. It's one of the reasons why sorcerers can be such varied characters, because the different things that you get at first level vastly change how you play the class. It wasn't super true in the PHB, because the main difference between the Draconic Sorcerer and the Wild Magic Sorcerer was the Wild Magic to the table, and there really wasn't any way that you could use the Wild Magic to the table, either to your benefit or to your detriment. It was just something that happened. You really couldn't control it that much. There were ways that you could kind of modify a bit of the probabilities on it, but for the most part, you didn't really change how you played the character much. It just changed what happened to the character. And then the Draconic Sorcerer, it actually did change how you played. But once we started getting things like the Favored Soul, or it's not called Favored Soul anymore, it's Divine Soul, storm sorcery, shadow magic, all those other things. They really started changing how the class plays, and it really started getting interesting. And that's definitely what the Runechild does. So, the second defining feature of the Sorcerer is it gets it. It's a second level. It's called Font of Magic. They get these things called sorcery points. The main thing most people use sorcery points for is something that you don't get until third level. But it uses the sorcery points, so it kind of counts as a defining feature, and that's this thing called meta magic. Meta magic is something that hasn't been exclusive to the sorcerer. I don't think ever. Meta magic this is something I know it was introduced in, or I know it existed in third edition, and I don't think I remember it being in second edition. It might have been, but I know for certain it was in third edition. And meta magic was actually feats that you could take that would allow you to upcast spells. And by upcasting them, depending on which feat you took, you could do different things to them. Like, you could make this one more difficult, have a higher class, or a higher save that you had to make, or other things. It was incredibly complicated, to be blunt. But that was third edition. That's how all of it went. And anytime you wanted to get a different meta magic option, you had to take it as one of your feats, which meant you couldn't take one of the other feats that were really, really useful for spellcasters, like things like spell penetration or improved spell penetration, things that were really, really essential if you wanted your spells to actually hit the thing. So it wasn't a perfect system. Fourth edition, there was a sorcerer in it. It was a weird class, if I remember correctly. It's been a really long time since I've played with that, and I believe there might have been metamagic feats that you could take, but they were very, very different than what they had in the third edition. When we get to fifth edition, metamagic is a exclusive thing to sorcerers. It is one of their defining features. And metamagic effectively allows you to kind of customize the spell as you're casting it. The original options for it were pretty pretty simple. Things like twin spell. You could basically cast the spell but make it affect two targets instead of one. Or quicken spell is probably the most popular one, which allows you to cast a spell that normally takes an action as a bonus action. And it is the primary reason why if you cast a spell as a bonus action, you cannot cast another leveled spell as an action. Or you cannot cast another leveled spell for the rest of your turn. That was specifically written in to prevent sorcerers from becoming really, really overpowered with their quicken spell. There's actually a bunch of different ones in there that a lot of people underlook. Things like careful spell, which makes it more difficult to save from it. And then there were a couple new metamagic features that were introduced in Tasha's. My personal favorite was Transmuted Spell, which allowed you to change the damage type of your spells, just because it was really interesting and fun to be able to just randomly go, oh, so you like fire. Well, how about a fireball that does cold damage? Ice ball! Things like that. It was fun. So anyway, those are the defining features of the Sorcerer. So how does the Runechild affect or deal with those defining features? Well, let's find out. So, at first level, you get Essence Runes. The description for Essence Runes is remarkably wordy for what they basically are. Basically, you get these runes. You get a number of runes equal to your level in Sorcerer. So effectively, you have as many Essence Runes as you have sorcery points. And the Essence Runes effectively And this is something that is a little bit weird, but I guess it's because they don't get any features at second level. Essence runes are tied to your sorcery points. Now, you don't get sorcery points until second level, but you get your essence runes at first level. So for your first level, they're completely useless because the way essence runes work is anytime you spend a sorcery point during your turn, at the end of that turn, a number of your essence runes equal to the number of sorcery points you spend begin to glow with stored energy, becoming charged runes. Also, as a bonus action, you may spend a sorcery point to convert 2 essence runes into 2 charged runes. So there's 2 different ways to get them. First, anytime you use your sorcery points, which again, most of the time for sorcerers is meta magic. Anytime you use that, you get a charged rune. So this is effectively anytime you use a sorcery point, you get a extra version of it. The way I kind of look at it is going back to my roots in World of Warcraft, and I'm not 100% certain if it works this way anymore. I know at one point, the Death Knights had these runes on their blade. They normally would have 6 of them. And when you use certain abilities, it would charge runes. And then that would allow you to use other abilities which would use up those runes. Same basic principle here, where you basically, this effectively turns your sorcery points into two stage uses. The first time you use a sorcery point, it activates a charged rune, and then you can have a number of those. You can use those on other things. So effectively, every sorcery point you can use twice. Once as a sorcery point, once as a charged rune, which sounds like it gets complicated. It really isn't. It gives you one additional thing to track on your character sheet. And it's kind of essential for the class 2 play. I've mentioned this quite a bit in the D&D Deep Dive. Complexity for complexity's sake is a bad thing. That's why 3rd edition had the problems that it did. That's one of the reasons why D&D started to decline, and it's one of the reasons why people from 2nd edition were not particularly fond of the 3rd edition and just kept playing 2nd edition. This same thing happened a little bit with 4th edition as well, though the complexity was significantly less so than just the clusterfuck that was the 3rd edition. Again, if you prefer 3rd edition, it's perfectly fine. It's a really, really overly complicated system. And you can still have a ton of fun playing it, but there's a reason that 5th edition is significantly more popular than 3rd or 4th edition ever was. And it's not entirely due to the fact that Matt Mercer plays it. It's a significantly more simple, streamlined system. It has enough complexity for you to do what you want, not so much complexity that it prevents you from doing what you want. And so the essence runes fit into that idea of, yes, it is increased complexity, but it's necessary for the rest of the class. All right, so final thing with essence runes: if you have 5 or more charged runes, you emit bright light in a 5-foot radius and dim light for an additional 5 feet, and then all your charged runes turn into normal runes after you finish a long rest. The difference between the original version of essence runes and this is effectively the bonus action aspect. This one, it says you can, as a bonus action, you may spend a sorcery point to convert 2 essence runes. Whereas in the original one, as a bonus action, you could spend any number of sorcery points you wanted to turn on any number of essence runes that you wanted. And that created the issues that I mentioned before. Oh, that's the other thing you can do with sorcery points that I completely forgot. You can use you can change sorcery points into spell slots and spell slots into sorcery points. So you know, if you had a if you used all your first level spell slots, you could take 2 sorcery points, turn them into a first level spell slot. And by using 2 sorcery points, you would also activate 2 to create a first level spell slot. You would also activate 2 charged runes. Now, you can also take a spell slot and turn it into sorcery points. You can take a first level spell and turn it into 2 sorcery points. That's where the unlimited limited resource comes in, because theoretically you can just sit there, because it just takes a bonus action to do this. So this is less than 6 seconds. You could literally just go first level slot, back to sorcery points, first level, back to sorcery, first level, back to sorcery, and effectively fill up all of your essence runes without, effectively meaning every time you go into combat, you will always have the maximum number of essence runes physically possible, because anytime you're out of combat, you can just sit there and transfer sorcery points. This doesn't really fix that, and I've realized that as I'm doing this. It does fix that as a bonus action, you may spend a sorcery point to convert 2 essence runes, but the basic of this, at the end of a turn during which you spent 1 or more sorcery points, a number of your essence runes equal to the number of sorcery points you spent begin to glow with stored energy. There's nothing in there that prevents you from doing this thing where you basically just charge all your essence runes, and that's an issue. Because technically the way I think this is supposed to work is you spend sorcery points to turn on essence runes, and then you use your essence runes, and then it's gone. It's not supposed to be something where you can just charge them outside of combat whenever you want. It's meant to be, like I said, that 2-tier kind of system where I use a sorcery point, then I use an essence rune, so your sorcery points effectively power your essence runes, and this doesn't really do that. Really, the only downside of always having all your essence runes filled is, again, if you have 5 or more charged runes, you glow. So walking through town glowing might be an issue. But there are a lot of ways to kind of deal with that as well. You know, again, if you've got a creative party, they can come up with ways like maybe they'll just cover you head to toe in robes so that no one can see it. Things like that. So, yeah, this still has that problem. My fix to it would probably be just saying, if you use your sorcery points for flexible casting, they don't turn into essence runes. Now, the other issue with that is that means because you don't get meta magic until 3rd level, your essence runes are completely worthless until you get to 3rd level. Even with this, at 1st level, we'll talk about one of the other things you get at 1st level. You cannot use any essence runes at 1st level because you have no sorcery points. Yeah, it's not a great. It's not a great. It's not a great way to deal with it, but I can't really think of a better way to make this work, to be blunt. Because otherwise, like I said, you can just go back and forth. I guess the other thing you could... No, because even that wouldn't work. Yeah, there really isn't a way to prevent people from exploiting the essence runes as long as you can use flexible casting, which is where you can change sorcery points into spell slots and spell slots into sorcery points. Because again, outside of combat, you can just go and I do it 14 times, and now I have 14 essence runes always. So yeah, that would be my one to change this. It kind of sucks because that means anything involving your essence runes are completely worthless until you get to 3rd level. But without that, it turns the essence runes into something that's completely broken. So, that being said, Moving on. Also at first level, you get Runic Magic. Now, Runic Magic is something that's new. And I believe this is actually to kind of put it in line with the other, new sorcerer subclasses. They give you an expanded spell list is effectively what this is. Now, something that is a little bit unique with this, you get an expanded spell list. These are, because sorcerers memorize their spells, they don't prepare them, quote unquote, every morning. They just have a list of spells that they know, and then they can cast those spells every morning. Unlike a wizard or a cleric, where every morning they get to choose from a list of which ones, sorcerers just know spells. However, one of the unique things about this is the second part of Runic Magic. When you gain a level in this class, you could replace one spell you gain from this feature with another spell of the same level. The new spell must be an abjuration or transmutation spell from the sorcerer, warlock, or wizard's spell list. That is interesting. I am not super familiar with abjuration and transmutation spells. In general, I don't have them memorized because I don't play a ton of caster classes. Creating spellcaster characters just takes longer because you have to pick their spells, and so I generally tend to not play them. Again, I have a ranger and a paladin, which are both half casters. I'm perfectly fine with that, but I do not believe. I have played a Bladesinger wizard, and yeah, that did take a long time. Anyway, abjuration spells are generally Abjuration spells are generally protection spells. Transmutation spells are exactly what they sound like. They change stuff. Neither of those are generally going to be offensive spells. So I do find this to be a little bit interesting, especially since the spells that you get access to, you would effectively be getting rid of these spells and possibly not being able to get them back. Like, to give you an example. The spells that you have, Protection from Good and Evil is one of the first levels of the spells that you had. When you get to third level, you get Lesser Restoration, which is not a spell that sorcerers, warlocks, or wizards have access to. And it is a remarkably useful spell to have. Lesser Restoration is a crazy useful spell. It's not quite as useful as Greater Restoration, which you also get once you get to the 9th level. But those would be spells that I would probably never get rid of because they're massively useful in a bunch of different situations. Then you have other things like Protection from Poison, Glyph of Warding, Freedom of Movement is another one that is really, really, really useful. So yeah, the runic spells that they have here are interesting, to say the least, and I like them. I think they're interesting. It does kind of turn this into a little bit more of a support type class, and I'm not upset about that. I like sorcerers in general. A lot of people, when they think about sorcerers, they kind of view them as even more so glass cannons than wizards, simply because with Quicken Spell you can do some major damage. Being able to throw out a fireball and then also being able to throw out a cantrip, or Twin Spell is another one that can be extremely useful. Being able to twin Disintegrate and hit 2 different targets with Disintegrate is a huge deal. So this, I just like the idea of having a sorcerer that, as their bonus action, they can quicken a Greater Restoration and remove paralysis from an ally that needs it. And then as their action, they can use one of their abilities. Like something that I forgot. I also have a sorcerer I built. He's a sorcerer warlock combo that I call my spell slinger, because he's built to just use Quicken Spell with Eldritch Blast and just fire off tons of Eldritch Blasts. Anyway, I forgot I created quite a few spellcasters. Anyway, the idea of being able to do something like creating a shadow blade, and then using that for your attacking on your action, and then as your bonus action you can death ward, or you can freedom of movement. You wouldn't be able to freedom of movement or death ward, because I think both of those are concentration. But you could greater restoration, then go in with your shadow sword and cut some into pieces. Things like that would be kind of cool. So anyway, moving on. The final thing that you get at first level is Glyph of Aegis. And this is another thing that existed in the original version, but they've made some modification. When you take damage, you can expend any number of charged runes as a reaction. Roll a number of d6s equal to the number of runes you expend. Reduce the damage by the total. This is really useful. Again, wording here, there's more to this, by the way. I just wanted to stop here because this is effectively the same thing as before. But I want to reemphasize. It says when you take damage, not when you're hit or when a creature hits you or anything. It's just any time you take damage, you can do this. And 1d6 at low levels is, even at low levels, is not going to be a great thing. But 3d6, 4d6, 5d6, that is a significant amount of protection that you can give. And this is any time you have essence runes, you can just use your reaction to burn a bunch of them and not take damage. That's one of the reasons why the idea of the Runechild Sorcerer being able to just always have all of their essence runes charged, and then as soon as they start using sorcery points, they get more. Like, they have a maximum number of essence runes, but as long as they're using some of those essence runes, anytime they're using sorcery points, they're just getting more essence runes back that they can then just keep going and going, and it becomes very broken very quickly. Glyph of Aegis is one of those things. In addition to that, when you reach 6th level, you can touch a creature as an action and expend up to 3 charged runes to transfer your protective power to it for 1 hour. The next time the creature takes damage within the next hour, it rolls a d6 per charged rune spent and reduces the damage by the total. You can't transfer this power to a creature already under the effect of Glyph of Aegis. Your Glyph of Aegis die becomes a d8 at 14th level. So this is the other thing that turns this into really broken if you have unlimited runes. Because again, if you use that the thing where you turn spell slots into sorcery points and sorcery points into spell slots, you will never run out of sorcery points. So every time you use an essence rune, like if you did this to literally every party member, you just went 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. At the beginning of every combat, every party member would have a 3d6 damage shield for the first amount of damage they take. Now, it only lasts for an hour, but it's not limited to a single thing. You just can't use it on the same person twice. And that's where things become broken really, really quick, because now anyone with a Runechild Sorcerer in their party is going to be almost immune to the first round of damage, the first source of damage they take, up until like mid tier 2. Probably closer to like, because 3d6 at like 7, 3d6 is still going to absorb at least a single attack. So yeah, that becomes really, really broken. So like I said, that's why I put that emphasis of doesn't work with flexible casting. If you do that, this turns into basically allowing you to use your sorcery points twice instead of, I just have unlimited essence runes. So that is Glyphs of Aegis. Moving on, at 6th level, you get, now, I'm going to pronounce this the way I like to pronounce it. I believe I'm pronouncing it wrong, but it doesn't feel right the other way. Sigilic Augmentation. I believe, because it's based, it's a form of the word sigil, which I pronounce sigil, but I believe it's officially supposed to be pronounced sigil, and I hate that. It's stuck in the back of your the throat. It doesn't feel right. Sigil. No, it's sigil. It makes much more sense. I believe I'm wrong. I don't care. It feels better. So anyway, Sigilic Augmentation. When you make a Strength, Dexterity, or Constitution ability check, you can expend a charged rune as a reaction to gain advantage on the roll. Very similar to what it was in the original one. The original one had a little bit extra. You can choose to maintain this benefit additional rounds by expending a charged rune at the start of each of your following turns. For the original version, it was a bonus action to do this, and it lasted for a turn, effectively. And then you could burn additional runes in order to keep it going. For this one, it's when you make a Strength, Dexterity, or Constitution ability check, you can just expend a charged rune as a reaction to gain advantage on the roll. So, a little bit easier. You don't have to worry about like it only lasts for a single check, while this one could last for multiple ones. But there's more. New paragraph. In addition, when you are forced to make a Strength, Dex, or Con saving throw, you can use your reaction and expend a charged rune to gain advantage on the saving throw. Once you use this feature in this way, you can't use it in this way again until you complete a long rest. My issue with this is that last line. Once you use this feature, you can't use it this way again until you complete a long rest. Because it is part of a different paragraph, does that mean it only applies to the saving throws, or can you only make a single ability check or saving throw once per long rest? Because that massively changes how this rule works. If someone were to bring it to a table I was running at and go, hey, what does this mean? Formatting really, really matters. Because of the formatting, that last line is, once you use this feature, is part of the second paragraph. It is not its own paragraph, which is extremely common. I would say that bottom line only applies to the saving throws, not the ability checks. That's how I would read it. However, that is a judgment call. There's nothing in the text that really defines it other than the fact that it's not made its own paragraph. And so theoretically, you can assume it only refers to that paragraph. Whereas if it was his own paragraph, then it would obviously apply to the entire thing. I would want that clarified. That's my only issue with this, is I want it clarified. If it works the way that I think it should work, the way that I ruled there, I think it's a cool ability. I like the idea of being able to burn your essence runes to give you advantage on physical abilities, because most spellcasters don't have good physical scores. So I like that. I think it's cool. Being able to get advantage on Strength, Dex, and Con saves, that is a little bit more broken, because ability checks, getting advantage and burning something in order to get advantage is not that big a deal. Saving throws are a big deal. Making your save can be the difference between being conscious and unconscious, or making your save can sometimes be the difference between being unconscious and being dead. Saving throws are significantly more weighted in 5th edition than ability checks are ever going to be. So having this not limit how many times you can do ability checks, as long as you have an essence rune, you can get advantage on an ability check, I'm fine with that. Having it limit just the saving throws, I think that makes a little bit more sense. As a one and done ability, I've mentioned one and done abilities ad nauseum at this point, because there's a lot of them in this supplement. The elixir paradox is what I always refer to. I'm not going to get into... I've said this many other times in this as a series. Go check one of the other videos to know what the elixir paradox is. But with this particular thing, I think it's a useful enough ability that I don't think it's going to be elixir paradoxed too badly. I think people will use it, and the other half of the ability is not limited to that one and done thing. So the Sigilic Augmentation will get used a fair amount. That one other ability will get used significantly less, and it should be. So, Moving forward, also at 6th level, you get Manifest Inscriptions. Another thing that was in the original one. The original version of it sucked. It was kind of pointless. Basically, the old version is as an action, you expended a charged rune to basically make any magical marks, runes, wards, or glyphs within 15 feet of you reveal themselves with a glow for 1 round. For 6 seconds. Anything within 15 feet would glow for 6 seconds. That's not that useful. It really isn't. This is actually useful. As an action, you expend a charge rune to reveal hidden or invisible arcane traps, which is new. Arcane traps wasn't a part of this. Then marks, runes, wards, sensors, or glyphs. So sensors is another thing that is new. Within 60 feet of you, not 15. So this is actually a useful thing. They glow with a dim light in a 5-foot radius for 1 minute. So the difference here. Magical traps. Most people, when they think of magical traps, will always think of runes or glyphs, effectively. Trap runes, and there are specific glyphs that are designed to be traps. So a lot of people would think, well, arcane traps is just extra words because arcane traps are runes or glyphs. Not necessarily. There are other ways that you can make arcane traps. One of my personal favorite adventures that I've ever run was actually released during the D&D Next playtest, and it was released at PAX, and I can't remember exactly what it was called. I think it was called The Minds of Madness or something like that. It was a joke campaign. It was a joke adventure, and in one of the rooms, the room itself was enchanted so that anytime somebody got to the center of the room, the room itself was enchanted with a reverse gravity spell. So anytime someone got to the center of the room, reverse gravity would happen and it would slam them into the ceiling, which the ceiling was covered in spikes. And then it would slam them back to the ground. And the way that it made people come into the room is there was an illusory chest of gold and magic items in the center of this circular room. And so invariably, players would run in, they go, and it would kill half of them. It was for level 5 players, so it was a powerful spell. My favorite way of a player disarming it is you find this kobold in there named Hugbug, I think his name was. And one of the parties I did this just used Hugbug as their trap finder. And what they would do is they would just force Hugbug to go first. Well, the first time he triggered a trap, he died. He had no hit points. He had like 4 hit points. It was really, really bad. So they would just take his corpse and throw his corpse into rooms before them to see if there was anything bad in there. Really, really macabre, but it worked. So they were able to see, oh, that's bad. Anyway, so yeah, arcane traps don't have to be glyphs or runes. They can just be a room enchanted with something. So this would detect arcane traps. It also detects sensors. Things like a scrying spell actually creates a sensor. So you would be able to tell not only that you're being scryed upon, but you would be able to see where you are being scryed upon from. You would literally see the little camera that they're using to scry on you. So yes. And then again, they glow for a minute. They don't glow for 6 seconds. So this is significantly more useful. And it has more things that it does that weren't in the original one. You have advantage on intelligence arcana checks to discern the nature of any magic revealed in this way for the duration. If the glyphs you reveal mean something in a language you can't read, you can understand them while they are glowing as if you knew that language. So this actually turns into a really, really useful thing. You know, if the glyph is written in Ancient Draconic and none of your party speaks Ancient Draconic, you're going to be able to tell, oh, look, it's a glyph. What does it do? No idea. It could be a happy fun time glyph. Or it could be a explode your face glyph. We don't know. This allows you to know that with an Arcana check. So yeah, cool stuff there. I actually like that one. Moving on to 14th level, you get Runic Torrent. When you cast a spell, you can expend 2 charges, or 2 charged runes, to cause the spell to deal force damage instead of its usual damage type. Additionally, all creatures targeted by the spell or within the spell's area must succeed on a strength saving throw against your spell's save DC or be knocked prone or pushed up to 15 feet away from the spell's point of origin. Once you use this feature, you can't do so again until you complete a short or long rest. So, it's one or done. Runic Torrent in the original one was very, very, very different. It basically, whenever you cast a spell, you expend a number of charged runes equal to the spell's level to allow it to ignore any resistance or immunity to the spell's damage type the target may have. That's a little bit broken, especially since there was no limitations to that. So this was just, hey, as long as you have essence runes, you never, nothing can resist any of your spells. It's a little bit broken. This, I actually like this a little better. First of all, it doesn't require you spending like 9 runes at once for a 9th level spell. It's just expend 2 charges to cause a spell to deal force damage, which effectively does the same thing. Force damage, off the top of my head, I cannot think of a single creature that has resistance to force damage. Force damage is kind of your catch-all damage that no one gets resistance to. I'm sure there's at least one creature with force damage resistance, but for the most part, almost no creatures, and none that I can currently think of, have resistance to force damage. So it does it in a different way, which I'm perfectly fine with. It does. It means that it can't be abused with things that give you additional damage on necrotic, like doing additional damage on elemental attacks or things like that. Like this gets around that. Also, I'm a big fan of either knocking targets prone or pushing them up to 15 feet away. Now, from the spell's point of origin, again, this is another thing that really easily could be argued at the table to mean 2 different things. Spell's point of origin could just mean wherever you cast a spell from. So just away from you, or if you have a familiar, which is not uncommon for sorcerers, a lot of familiars allow you to cast spells from their place. So basically, whichever place the spell was cast from knocks them away. And they use that wording specifically so that if you have a familiar, that it's you're able to use the familiar to maybe knock them in a different direction, which is really, really useful. This could be super fun with like a fireball, especially if you have a cliff. You could just, again, get to a point or put your familiar in a point where you've got like 3 or 4 of them that are 15 feet away from the end. And it doesn't specifically, or it does specifically say, it says your choice. And it doesn't specifically say, when it says all creatures, it doesn't say specifically that all of them have to be knocked prone or all of them have to be pushed. So theoretically, again, these are places where some clarification would be useful. Theoretically, if you hit people with this, like you had allies in that area and they got hit, you could just knock them prone while you knock all the bad guys off the cliff. Like that could be super fun, super interesting. And then limiting it to a one and done for short or long rest. Again, I'm not a huge fan of one and dones. Short rest is better than long rest, but it's still, like I mentioned before, there are a lot of adventuring days where you don't get a short rest. So I would prefer this to be, you can use this twice per long rest instead of until you complete a short or long rest, just because it will get used more often. And again, it's the whole elixir paradox. Check out the other videos to know what that means, but it just doesn't get used as much when it's a one and done, even a one and done short rest. So yeah, it's my only issue with it, and the issue is very slight. I think this works fine as a one and done. I don't think it's quite powerful enough to be a one and done long rest for one and done short rest. It's not bad. I don't have a huge problem with that, and it's a cool ability. I think you'd have a lot of fun with it. So yeah. Finally, at 18th level, you get Arcane Exemplar. You can use a bonus action to expend a charged rune to become a being of pure magical energy. While in your exemplar form, you gain the following benefits. You get a flying speed of 60 feet. Creatures have disadvantage on saving throws against your sorcerer spells. You have resistance to damage dealt by spells. Whenever you cast a spell of first level or higher, you regain hit points equal to the spell's level. The form lasts until the end of your turn. However, you could expend a charged rune at the end of your turn, no action required, to extend the duration until the end of your next turn. When your exemplar form ends, you are stunned until the end of your next turn. Once you use this feature, you can't use it again until you complete a long rest. This is a good one and done ability because it's super, super cool. It did exist in the old version. The old version was not quite as useful and was a little bit more confusing to use. First of all, you had a flying speed of 40 feet versus 60 here. It actually increased your spell save DC by 2. This I like better because you don't have to change numbers in the middle of combat. Things like this is what's called a floating modifier. Floating modifier is a number that is not always the same during combat. It will change randomly. One of the reasons 3rd edition combat can slog so bad is there are tons of floating modifiers in 3rd edition. Pathfinder 1st edition and Pathfinder 2nd edition went crazy with floating modifiers. But it slows down combat significantly because you have to sit there and go, okay, well, this is what I have written on my character sheet, but because of this, and this number is no longer the number I use. I have to do a different number that only exists for this particular time. It's not a great thing to do. The advantage-disadvantage system works better. Instead of having to change the number that you're used to adding or the number you're used to using, which will always cause people to make mistakes, in this it's just disadvantage. You pick the one. From a numerical standpoint, from a statistical standpoint, adding advantage to a roll effectively is the same as adding plus 3.5. And adding disadvantage to a roll is effectively the same as adding minus 3.5 to it. When you factor in probabilities and things like that, that's what it eventually rolls this is out to. So, what that means is this is actually better for the sorcerer. It's going to be more useful for them, and it doesn't require adding floating modifiers, which is something that 5th edition completely threw away. They're not fun. They're not really useful. They just gum up the works, to be blunt. The rest of the things are basically this is the same. However, the original version of this required you to burn 6 charges in order to do it. And it lasts for 3 rounds, plus 1 additional round for each rune over 6 that you used. So you basically had to guess how many rounds you're going to need it right from the beginning. This one effectively allows you to go, oh, do I think I'm going to need it longer? I'll burn another rune. And it also means that this one you can technically extend by, on your turn, casting a spell with a sorcery point to refill one of your runes. The other thing is different is in the original version, it just said you can't move or take actions until after your next turn, where this one it specifically says you are stunned. And there is a difference between you can't take actions or move and stunned. Stunned, you are unconscious. It breaks concentration, and it causes all attacks against you to have advantage. It makes you auto-fail your dex and strength saving throws. It is a very different condition. So it does give you a choice that you have to make when you're doing this. It's like, okay, well, do I have enough runes that I'm not going to be stunned in the middle of something that can get me killed? You know, if you're fighting, a really powerful sorcerer that has access to the Disintegrate spell, getting stunned could mean the end of your character. Because if Disintegrate takes you to 0 hit points, you are dust. It is a Thanos snap, you're gone. And the only way to get you back is with a wish spell or a true resurrection spell, both of which are 9th level spells. Generally, getting hit by disintegrate means your character is gone and is never coming back. So with the Arcane Exemplar, you really do need to go, okay. And it also means when you're playing, you're going to be taking count of how many essence runes you have charged. You're also going to have to take count of how many sorcery points you have charged, because sorcery points turn into essence runes. So if the battle is going longer than you expected it to, you can burn a sorcery point to get a charged rune, so that you can keep this going and not lose a turn and possibly lose your character. And that also means for the other things you have, like your Glyph of Aegis, you may avoid using it if that means you'd be using your last rune, because then you would be out of charged runes. So I like this version a little bit better. I like that there's a little bit more stakes to it, and as a one-and-done ability, this is a great one-and-done ability. I love transformation abilities like this. Paladins get them as their ultimate ability for their subclasses. Most Paladins get some sort of transformation ability, and I like that. I think they're fun. I think they feel flashy and just make you feel very heroic and powerful. So, anyway, let's go final thoughts. Overall, this is a really nice upgrade to what was in the original Tal'Dorei campaign setting. Again, one of my issues with the original Tal'Dorei campaign setting was none of these things ever got updates. And that is an issue. When you publish something, people are going to find ways to exploit it that you never thought of. So publishing something and then never allowing it to be updated as far as like tabletop RPG design is a bad idea. That's why we have errata for every single book, and there is constantly more coming out. That's why Tasha actually errataed quite a few different things, including changing how the Blade Singer cantrips worked, because they had been exploited immensely in the Adventurers League and just the tables around. So this effectively allowed Mercer and Critical Role in general to errata a bunch of things that just didn't work. The one thing that they missed is essence runes can still become an unlimited resource. Again, using flexible casting to just use sorcery points to create a spell slot, and then that exact same spell slot turning it back into sorcery points creates problems. There was a version, there was a thing that used to be kind of popular in the Adventurers League. I can't actually remember how they dealt with it, but it was called the Coffee Lock, which was you would take some levels in Warlock and then levels in Sorcerer, and then what would happen is as you Warlocks get their spell slots back on a short rest. So anytime the party took a short rest, what would happen is a Coffee Lock would transfer all of their any spells that they hadn't cast from their Warlock into sorcery points, and so Coffee Locks just never ran out of sorcery points, and they could use them. It was an unlimited resource, because anytime you took a short rest, and because Warlocks, as they got higher, their spell slots just got higher, they would get more and more sorcery points as their Warlock level went up. And so if you kind of did equal levels of Sorcerer and Warlock, you had tons of sorcery points that you could do some really, really crazy stuff with. And I can't remember how they did it out with it. I think they eventually came up with a way to curb that. But Coffee Lock was a really big problem. And that's essentially what Essence Runes are. It's the Coffee Lock that doesn't require you multi-classing into a Warlock. Because you can Coffee Lock these Essence Runes over and over and over again. So again, just putting a limitation of, okay, well, flexible casting does not create Essence Runes. It only happens when you use meta magic or some other sorcery feature, which I believe are the only two uses of sorcery points, I believe. before I say this completely wrong. Yeah, that's it. It's meta magic and flexible casting. So just by saying, hey, this doesn't work with flexible casting, it fixes just about everything in here. It does kind of suck that you can't use Glyph of Aegis until you get to 3rd level, because that's when you actually get meta magic options. But I think it's a better way to deal with the class. Oh, and I guess you can, up until that point, you can just use a bonus action to convert sorcery points into 2 essence runes. So yeah, so you will be able to use Glyph of Aegis in that. You just have to prepare it, and then once you hit 3rd level, so yeah, it doesn't even cause that big of a problem. So that's my change to it. Anyway, that is gonna be all for me today. As always, remember, like, subscribe, turn notifications on in the comments down below. What are your thoughts on the Essence Rune coffee lock problem? Do you think... first of all, am I forgetting whatever ruling Wizards of the Coast made that made coffee lock no longer viable and somehow would mean that this doesn't work? Or do you think I'm overreacting and Essence Runes being such a defining part of the Runechild doesn't matter if they're unlimited? Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, that's all for me today, and I will see you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.